morning. Welcome everyone to our first Premodern Korean lecture series of the semester, in fact, of the academic year. My name is Myok Park. I'm an associate professor of Korean linguistics and language in the Department of East Asian Languages and Literatures. I'll be the moderator for today's event, and I am delighted to have our guest speaker, Professor Barbara Wall, today to enlighten us with a very interesting topic of her talk. She's an associate professor in Korean studies at the University of Copenhagen. She has a BA in Japanese studies and classical Chinese from Heidelberg University, and an MA in Confucian studies from Seongkyungwan University, and a PhD in Korean literature from the Royal University Bochum. She's interested in the curriculum, translation, and adaptation of literary narratives in Korea, Japan, and China. Her first book, The Dynamic Essence of Transmedia Storytelling, a graphical approach to the journey to the West in Korea, has appeared in Brill's East Asian Comparative Literature and Culture series in 2024. I believe she'll be talking to us about this book, which challenges many established truths about popular literary classics by presenting an analysis of 60 Korean variations of the journey to the West, which includes novels and poems, as well as films, comics, paintings, and dance performances dating from the 14th century until today. So before I invite Professor Wall to the floor, I'd like to let our audience know that there will be a Q&A session after the talk. So if you have any questions you want to ask, you can make use of the Q&A box to post your questions with your name and affiliation. So after the talk, I'll go over them for the speaker to address them in the order received. Now, please join me in welcoming Professor Wall to the floor. Barbara, it's all yours now.
Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to talk about the journey to the West. That's my favorite story, and it's difficult to stop myself, but I will try to keep it to 40 minutes. Yes, I will soon start sharing my slides, but I would also like to, quite often, not to feel lonely during my presentations. I might also might have questions to you. And then, so for questions for the Q&A, please use the Q&A here on the webinar. If otherwise, you can also use the chat to answer my questions. So let me try to. Yes. So here you can see the cover page of my book. The introduction and also some of the chapters are open access. So if you Google it, you can find it and have access to some parts. I'm also happy to answer all kinds of questions. So this is really, I love talking about this and I love writing about this. So if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. You will see, so I'm aware that this is a pre-modern Korean lecture series. I'm always kind of moving between pre-modern and modern. And I think this is actually what makes this so interesting. So you might ask, why is this important? Why should we even think about it? And here, just to check, and if you see this, are you familiar with this? And now I think you can use the chat. And you look at this. Do you know what this is? So you can just write in the chat kind of what you see. A K-pop video. Do you know which band it is? 17's music video, right? Do you know the title of the video? Anybody knows the title of the video? K-pop, yeah, starts with super. And you also know, that's totally right. Do you also know what the title of this video is in Korean?
It says Sonogong at the bottom. Is that right?
Exactly. It says Sonogong. Exactly. Sonogong. So the title itself is a reference to the protagonist of the Journey to the West, to Sonogong. And because, I mean, the producers do not expect everyone in the world to be familiar with the name, I guess, that's my guess, they titled it Super. But if you also hear, I mean, you can check the whole lyrics. It's not only the title, also in the lyrics, you can hear how Sunokung hops on his cloud. And also how his weapon, he has the staff as a weapon, as you can also, as I will also mention a bit later. So this is happening in the 21st century. There are artists who try to express some ideas or emotions by using references to the journey to the West. Now we are jumping into pre-modern times. So here that was 21st century, and this song actually came out last year. And now we are jumping to the 14th century, where we have Isaac writing a poem, and he called this poem Red Monkey. And you might say, yeah, monkey, that can be everyone. But it becomes clear if you look at the poem itself that he is also referring very directly to the journey to the West. And this is what I think is so fascinating, that there are artists in the 21st century that use references to the journey to the West. They play with the story world to express their feelings or ideas. And then we have a thinker in the 14th century who's doing exactly the same. So over hundreds of years, this story world, as I will call it, or story cloud, is so alive. How can this happen? Right? We all know that some stories are forgotten, but others are alive. How can a story be so alive over hundreds of years? And this is, I think, what makes me, I still don't have an answer. I try to kind of understand this kind of popularity. Yes. So this is kind of my basic motivation to find out what makes stories so popular, right? Are there any, so my book is not, I mean, the case of my book is the story to the world, the story to the West. Are there any other story universes? So if you hear story universe, are there any other story universes you are familiar with? When you hear story universe, what pops up in your mind? Anything that when you hear story universe, White Snake, oh, wonderful. White Snake, Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, exactly. So just to make clear that, so Journey to the West is only one case. There are many, and White Snake, I actually have an image showing Liang Luo's book on the White Snake. White Snake is a wonderful example. Harry Potter, you are right. Here I just, oops. Cinderella would be another case, right? Then the Three Kingdoms, we have King Arthur, Ise, the Tales of Ise, Mulan, Genji, Chunyang. So these are just some examples that we know of. The main arguments of my book are like this, and I hope it makes sense. As you can see, I'm not the best designer, but I try to understand these story worlds as story clouds. And I say that these literary classics like The Journey or Harry Potter or The White Snake, that they grow as transmedial, transtemporal, transauthorial, transnational story clouds made up of versions. So here you can see a cloud, right? This blue thing should be understood as a cloud, and all these drops symbolize versions of it, right? And I like the idea of a cloud because, as we know, a cloud can change the form. It can also disappear. I mean, if nobody is interested in a story any longer, then a story might also disappear. It might grow, it might change the form according to the variations. And what I really like about this kind of idea of understanding story worlds as clouds is also that it can it can always change forms. It's dynamic, right? So if there is a new variation, what we think about the story the image might kind of change. So that's why I use a cloud as a symbol. Still, I think where we are now is that we do not tend to understand these story worlds as story clouds. If we imagine it, we can imagine it, but it's quite difficult because it's so ungraspable, right? So we are still very much in literary studies. We are still very much stuck in what is often called reception studies. And reception studies do not allow any dynamic understanding of stories. Reception studies kind of suggest that there is one original, this original has one single author, a precise date of publication, and a clear nationality. And if you want to, even if you just suggest another understanding, it's explosive. So in the case of The Journey to the West, the original, if you look at conservative literary histories, you will see the original is the Shirda Tang edition from 1592, so from the almost 1600. And the author is Wu Cheng'en. So you have 1592 as a clear publication, and it is Chinese. And it's not only the case with China, it's the case with all other countries. So if you kind of question and say, oh, I think The Journey to the West is not only Chinese, it's quite transnational. Or if you do that with Genji, right? The tales of Genji, or with King Arthur also, right? Then people will protest and say, no, that's ours. And in the case of The Journey to the West, it's what's really funny also about the author, that we do not really know who the author is. But if you have one original, if you reduce it to one original, then somehow you need an author. So the author is often said to be Wu Cheng'en, but there is no evidence for him as being the author. And there are lots of discussions about, is he the author or is he not? And then when you look at translations or editions, many people say, I have actually no idea who the author is. But still on copyright pages, there is this kind of box you have to fill out where you have to put in an author. So this kind of literary work cannot survive without an author. So people say, you read the preface or the introduction, you see, I have no idea who the author is. But then on the copyright page, it's Wu Cheng'en. And it's even worse with library catalogs. So if you want to register a book and you don't have an author, you cannot register the book. So sometimes it's very clear, we don't know who the author is, but still you have to fill out the boxes. So many of our systems, bureaucratic systems, are based on reception studies. One original, one author, one nation, one date. And I think one of the biggest problems is that it's so difficult to imagine story clouds. So because they are always kind of changing the form. And I think we need some kind of new method to make story clouds more graspable. And I'm not the only one who is thinking about this. You might be familiar with Jenkins, who is known for his for transmedia storytelling. I mean, sometimes I think he's even called the father of transmedia storytelling, and he calls these story universes bottomless, and it's impossible for any one consumer to get a story universe because it's so ungraspable. Yeah, so Wolf, he says that it's difficult to see a story world in their totality. No one version or no one window shows everything. So usually we are familiar with one version, and then, but this one version is not the whole story, right? Yeah, so how can we get story clouds that are dynamic, that have this kind of dynamic essence? So what I will do today, and I try to be not too long, is I will give you a very short introduction to the story cloud or story universe of The Journey to the West. I will then kind of share my struggles with the theoretical framework, and I'm still not totally happy with my solutions. It's still kind of there. And then at the end, I will share some visualizations, visualization attempts of the story universe of The Journey to the West. Yes, in my book, I try to avoid using, so here you can see the pronunciation of Xiuji, or The Journey to the West in Chinese, Japanese, Korean, or Vietnamese. The Journey to the West circulates in many different regions of the world. In the book, I just use the journey because I don't want to reduce it to one nation, right? Yeah, so also in the presentation, whenever I say the journey, I mean the journey to the West. So very, very brief, the journey to the West, what happens in the journey to the West? It's a journey to the West. So here you can see the team who are traveling together to the journey to the west, to India, from Xi'an, from China to India, to find the real Buddhist scriptures. And this is, many of you might be aware of this, that there were also historical travelers who traveled from the East to India to find Buddhist scriptures and then to bring them back to the East and translate them. So there are some kind of historical elements in this. So the novel definitely plays with these historical elements, but it's a story. Here in the very middle, you can see a monk, and then who is surrounded by his disciples. So they are together. They are protecting the monk on his way to the west. And as a spoiler, so they arrive in the west. They get, at the end, they get the scriptures. They return to the East. They attain enlightenment. So it's the best happy end you can think about. So you might say, oh, wow, how can this story be so popular if it's really just a journey to the West? So what we can see here, I mean, it differs from version to version, but quite often we have around 30 episodes. So the pilgrims, or this group, they are traveling from the east to the west. And then during the journey, they meet monsters or demons or kind of mountains they have to, very difficult, or disasters they have to overcome. And they always overcome everything. But so this is kind of the pattern of all these episodes. The pilgrims encounter hindrances. Then here, as we can see, this is Sun Wukong. We already mentioned his name. So it's the title also of 17th video that we just watched, right? Here we see him here with his staff, his weapon, and also with his crown or headband here. So what happens? The monkey, he contrives a plan, and then they overcome the hindrances, and then the pilgrims happily continue the journey, and then this pattern is repeating itself again and again, 30 times. So in many translations, but also adaptations, there are, sometimes it's only like 5 episodes, sometimes there are 30 episodes, but the episodes are very similar. So you can leave some of them out. There is not a set number of episodes you need to understand the journey to the West. Yes. So just to give you, and I think I will just leave my presentation just for a second. You can also scan this QR code if you like. So I struggled a lot with kind of defining what is the journey to the West. And we can also talk about this later, but if the journey to the West does not have an original, what is then part of the journey to the West? And you can see here, I made together with my partner, I made a database. So what I understand, or kind of how I reduce the journey to the West in my book, is I chose 60 variations or versions of the journey to the West, Korean ones. Of course, I know there are many more in China and in Japan. I mean, it's unbelievable, and around the world. But so my aim was not to include everything. My aim was more to understand the dynamics of how the journey to the West circulates. So I thought 60 versions might be enough to understand some of the dynamics. I also categorized these 60 versions into translations, adaptations, and intertexts. And you can see they have different colors. If you use your cursor and go over them, you can see some more bibliographical information. So here they would be 60. And now I'm going back to the slideshow. So just to give you an idea, I worked with these 60 versions for the Journey to the West. And then, so my main struggle was to find an alternative to reception studies. And my life was so easy when I started because I thought, okay, I can use reception studies. I use the novel from 1592 as my original, and then I will just check what kind of versions, Korean versions I have after 1592. But then I realized there are so many variations already before 1592. And then I thought I will just ignore them because it would make my life so much more difficult, right? But then at some point, so if you think of this, so if you throw a stone into water and the stone is your original, then the reception would be the waves. But if you already have waves before the stone is thrown into water, it doesn't make sense anymore, right? You might kind of be able to ignore one wave, but if there are more waves, it doesn't work. Yeah, so these kind of, the story world doesn't fit into the frame of reception studies. And I'm not the only one who's struggling with this. There is, especially also in Japanese studies, many scholars who try to find new ways out of beyond reception studies. One of them is Joshua Mostow, who is suggesting in 2014, which is already 10 years ago, to use the term cultural appropriation instead of reception, and he calls reception as being too passive. Then, as one of you mentioned in the chat, there's Yang Luo, who wrote about the global white snake and who says, rather than taking a sinocentric approach and treating the English, Japanese, Korean, and other iterations of the legends as derivative and of lesser importance, this study focuses on the travels of the legends in multiple directions. And she just says, original, there is no original, right? She is really interested in versions and variations. Then, of course, I think there are many more. Just to show you some examples, Wild Idema wrote extensively about legends with many versions. So he is kind of an expert for all kinds of story worlds. And he says it's very difficult to kind of find of any origins of these legends. So he is also, presenting more the many variations. And then who is really was extremely brilliant, I think, is here Michael Emmerich, who also says we need a new terminology away from reception. And then he proposes to use replacement instead of reception. And I think this is really brilliant. And he also says in this case, no version would be too small. And so he goes to the extreme and says, so there was several years ago, there was an Genji. So here his book is about Genji, of course. Several years ago, there was an anniversary, like a Genji anniversary celebrated in Japan. And so people were also making cakes, Genji cakes. And he says, so even if you eat this cake, and by eating this cake, it kind of courses to, or it kind of makes you imagine the story. This is a replacement of the story itself. So even a cake can be a replacement. Even a cake can be a version of the tale of Genji. So, and this made me think a lot. So there were some people who were more emphasizing the continuity and others were emphasizing more the radical breaks. And I tried to kind of find a compromise. So I think Idema was more like he tried to find like constant elements. Emmerich, then on the other side, he was more talking about radical breaks. And then Jenkins, again, he is talking about integral elements. So he says no given work will reproduce every element of a story cloud, but each must use enough that we recognize at a glance that these versions or works belong to the same fictional realm, to the same story cloud. So the next question for me was then, what are these kind of integral elements of the journey to the West? And to find this out, I will just share this with you, and now you can use the chat again. I'm sure that many of you will be familiar with the Marvel universe. So let's think a little bit about the integral elements of the Marvel universe. Is there any character you recognize here? Iron Man, Hulk, Captain America. Yes, exactly. What about this man here with muscles and a hammer? Who is this? Thor. Yeah, exactly. And why do we know that this is Thor? Because of the hammer, right? So if we only had Yeah, exactly what you say, Christina, muscles and the hammer. So if we only have a man with muscles, then we wouldn't, it could be like all kinds of heroes. If we have a man with muscles and a hammer, then immediately we think, oh, this must be Thor, right? Which is pretty amazing that we all think about this. So I, on my search for integral elements of story worlds, I thought, okay, we have one category of integral elements would be characters. And then the second category would be objects. And very often the combination of objects and characters makes the element very specific, right? So we would have as integral elements, we would have to search for characters and for objects. Now I will to the next slide. And there is something beyond characters and objects. So if you look at these posters from Dune, besides characters and objects, is there something that you can see that is repeated on these posters? The desert. Exactly, the desert. Places, right? So I started kind of my search for integral elements of the journey to the West by focusing on characters, on objects, and on places. And you might be, I don't know, some of you might be familiar with these story cubes. I show this just to make you to kind of explain how I try to understand how story clouds work. So I understand these integral elements, so the characters, objects, places, very similar to how we understand these story cubes. So if you play with these story cubes, you have 9 story cubes, and it's an actual game and it's much fun. So if you like storytelling, I would recommend buying these story cubes. So you throw the dices and you see 9 images on the dices. And then it would be your turn to make up a story by using all these 9 images. And this is also somehow how I understand, for example, now with the game, The Black Myth. It's not really an adaptation of the novel from 1592. It's kind of a mixture of different elements, right? So you kind of select different elements and then you make it a story. So this is how I understand what is happening. And here you can see now I made up so like a pool of integral elements. You have here 12 characters that appear in many of the 60 versions. A list of these. So of course the monkey, the monk, pig, and so on. Then objects, places that reappear in the versions, then also motifs. I added motifs. And actually, I also added these episodes as units, as integral elements, because they are so independent. So then if we wanted to make now a new version of the Journey to the West, what I would say is, okay, we use these actants, and here actants means characters, places, objects, and episodes, and combine them and make up a new version. So I think this is kind of what happens in a very simple way. So here are, just to make sure that it's not too long. So here are some of the, not only. So some of the versions just is, we know from the Journey to the West. So here, this is kind of in the middle. We have Narada Superboard, the flying superboard. And I think in my generation, so if you're in your 40s or 50s, you might be familiar with this one. Also so many people, if you ask people in my generation, are you familiar with the Journey to the West? Many might say, oh yeah, I'm familiar with flying superboard. Then the younger generation is more familiar with Dragon Ball. This is like there's also a lantern here at the right bottom. There is also, I think this was a Japanese TV series, and there was also a K-drama. So it's living in different media. And now I would like, before we start Q&A, I would like to give you 3 cases. I think 1 translation, 1 adaptation, and 1 intertext, just to give you an idea of some of the versions I worked with. I would like, so here, this is my colleague Kim Young, who is a total expert of the Journey to the West in Korea. She's using reception studies as a framework, but she knows much more than I do. And my research wouldn't have been possible with all these experts who are working actually on the Journey to the West in Korea. what is interesting is that in her research, she would never use any versions before 1592, because if you work in reception studies framework, then you start with the original. You don't start before. So there is none of the experts for the Journey to the West in Korea are paying attention to what comes before 1592, because everybody is in reception studies. And even I tried to give several talks also in Korea. Students are quite open and say, oh yeah, that makes sense. So if you are working in reception studies, everybody says, Barbara, but you have to start with an original. You have to start with an original. So it was quite difficult. Yeah. So, but we worked together, and we also went to the Deep Rooted Tree Museum in Suncheon. I called it. There was a manuscript of the Journey to the West, and we went there and then made pictures of this. Here you can see this manuscript is one translation, a Korean translation of the Journey to the West. It has 20 volumes, and the writer is unknown. And what is interesting is that this manuscript is a copy of a newspaper novel, so of the new translation of the Journey to the West, which had 400 issues and appeared in 2930. And you might think, would you ever copy a whole newspaper novel? I mean, would you do that? Who would do that? So I thought a lot about motivation and so on. But what is, I think, interesting is that you can find the newspaper novels still in historical archives, but not all of them. It's not complete, but the manuscript is complete. And then, so here, this is kind of how the manuscript looks. Here, it's kind of Korean. And then at the end, you hear this, among all travelogues of all times, the Journey to the West is the best. And what's also interesting is that here you have some literary Chinese at the end saying, oh, it took 612 days. Wow. So this is one of the cases. It activates 66 out of the 67 integral elements. So when you think again back to the pool of integral elements I made, all in all, there are 67 integral elements. And this manuscript would activate 66 out of 67. Then the second case, which I call an adaptation of the Journey to the West, is this amazing stone pagoda of the Gyeongcheon Temple, which you can now find in the National Museum. And here, this is also a picture from the National Museum. You can see how high it is. Here there are people watching it. You can also find a copy in the Tapgol Kungwon in the pagoda park in Chungno. And some of the panels are even more visible, or even easier to recognize what is on the panel. So here on the whole pagoda, we can see many kind of images related to Buddhism. But on the second story and on some of the panels on the third story, there are images related to the Journey to the West. And you can imagine that there is one image that refers to one episode. So you can, so if you look at one panel, you see, I mean, if you are familiar with the episode, you know what is going on. It's kind of like a comic, right? It's the oldest variation of the journey from the 14th century. It does not appear in any of the studies on the reception of the Journey to the West in Korean, because it doesn't fit into the reception studies framework, right? The original is still thought to be from 1592. So how can this be part of reception if the original was not even born yet? And it's not, you might think, okay, so Barbara is a Journey to the West fan, so there might be some monkeys on the panels. And I mean, who knows if this is really the Journey to the West or just any like monkey or pig or whatever. But it's not only characters or objects that are shown, it's really references to 18 of the 38 episodes that are in the pool of integral elements. So it's kind of very substantial. And this is very surprising in the 14th century. Here, this is, so just imagine you are a bird and you are sitting on top of the pagoda looking down. These numbers all refer to one episode, and I numbered them according to the order they appear in many translations, in many quite like newer translations. Also, for example, you might remember the cover page I showed you at the beginning. If you look at these numbers, so then you might imagine, so you are a bird, right? Now you know, and now you transform yourself into a visitor and you go around this pagoda. Do you see any order? If you look, so here it seems to be like 5, 6, 7, 8, but then there's 20. So this does not really make sense. Here's also 5, 6. So some of the episodes are repeated, right? So I do, and there are not the expert for the Journey to the West, but there are art historians who analyze this pagoda. And they also made rubbings, which make it even clearer which kind of episodes are shown here at the pagoda. And there was a discussion going on, like, how should we read this, right? In which order? And then at the end, there was one Chinese researcher who said, oh, actually, I think we have to give up. There is no order. These episodes just exist as independent units, and perhaps we just have to accept this. So it's kind of really, when you go back to these story cubes, you can kind of combine them as you like. So no established order, and this would be one of the panels here. There is one episode out of these more than 30 that is called the Red Boy episode. And here you can see Red Boy sitting in a flower. Red Boy is symbolizing fire. So wherever Red Boy is, there is like fire and disaster. And this fire is what kind of hinders the group of pilgrims to move on. And then there's Guanyin, the Bodhisattva, Guanyin coming with water, and then they can move on. So just to give you an example how it looks like, the rubbings make it even clearer. So here, like my last case is here these kind of figures or decorations on the roofs. In Korean, it's called chapsang. And you might already know, so this is our monkey, Sun Wukong. And again, you might think, oh, Barbara, again, is making up something. So she sees monkeys everywhere. But there is this official protocols. You might know that in Korean, like in the Joseon Dynasty, there are royal protocols for everything. And we have these royal protocols for repair works on the Changdeok Palace. So had to be like the roof had to be repaired, and also some of these kind of chapsang, these figures. And here you can see in the documents that the first figure is called Sun Hengja, which refers to Pilgrim Sun, so to Sun Wukong. And even better, so there are like nails that you use to fix these figures, and they are called Sun Hengja Taechol, so Pilgrim Sun nails, which means he became the representative of these figures. So that was my third case, and now I will just show you some visualizations, and then we have time for Q&A. Yeah, as I said, I struggled a lot with finding an alternative out of reception studies. So my first idea was to make a pool of integral elements and understand, like making a new versions of the Journey to the West as recombinations of these integral elements. So the first thing, very simple, I thought, okay, I somehow have to visualize all integral elements. And the easiest way to do that, I mean, there are different ways too, but one of the easiest way is just to make a tree diagram. So here you can find all 67 integral elements as a tree diagram. So you have protagonists, you have objects, you have these episodes, and so on. But of course, this is not dynamic. It just shows, okay, there are integral elements, right? But we know, according to if there are new versions, they are moving and so on. So what I did, I made a tree diagram for each of these 60 versions of the Journey to the West and put it together as an animation. And it looks a bit like this, which is still very simple. I did this to show not all versions. So in total, in the pool, there are 67 integral elements, but not all versions activate all elements. So sometimes it's just, as you can see, it's just some protagonists. Sometimes the translations tend to activate all of them. Adaptations tend to activate less. So this is just to show that there is some kind of stability. So there are integral elements, but at the same time, the story cloud is changing because different versions activate different of these integral elements. But then I thought, okay, I want to visualize the core of the story world. And I became a bit crazy and started to draw circles, many circles. So these are 60 circles for each of the versions. And then I marked how many versions activate these integral elements, starting with just to give you an idea to understand what you see. For example, I checked how many versions activate Sunukung. There are versions of the Journey to the West that do not use Sunukung, but something else. So here you can see I think it was 4 versions that do not use Sunukung, but all the other versions, all the other 56 versions would use Sunukung. And then you can see that there are many versions who don't have a monk. But so I don't know, perhaps 10 or so. 50 of the versions all activate a monk. And here the numbers refer all to the episodes. I'm still not done with this. So if you have good ideas to help visualizing, that would be amazing. So I did one more and then I will stop. These are these bubble charts. And I try to visualize how important the role of each integral element is in the story cloud. So the darker these bubbles are, the more versions activate the element. So here again, we can see here the monkey, darker blue and bigger. So the bubble is bigger and it's darker. So it means more of the versions activate him. And then you have all these episodes here in yellow. Yes. So I think that was my last slide. Here's a link also to the book. And as I said at the beginning, I'm also happy. So you please ask all kinds of questions, or I'm also happy for suggestions. If you have similar topics, you can also write to me. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much for the wonderful talk. I learned so much about the Journey to the West. I mean, I read it when I was little in my childhood in different versions, like the comic books and things like that. But I've never really looked at it from this scholarly perspective before, and it's really interesting to see all these work that you've done. So now it's time to ask questions. As we said before, you could actually post your question in the Q&A box. We already have 2 questions, so I'm going to read them to you so that you'll know which ones we're talking about. So there's a question by Lisa Leckney. She says, thank you for the fascinating discussion. I am most familiar with Japanese anime versions of The Journey, and I wonder if you are familiar with Azuma Hiroki's database theory of media studies.
Oh, I'm not. So thank you so much. So this is exactly what I need. I will check it out. I don't know about this, but I will check it out.
And so there's a second question by Christina. She says, what has been your favorite or most influential adaptation variant in your research for The Journey to the West? If it wasn't 1592, the original, what made it better for you?
That's difficult because I have so many favorite versions. And then there's also a question. The second, I like that very much. What makes it better than the original? So is the original necessarily the best one? I think it's very difficult to say that in an objective way, because I mean, you could go for popularity, right? So I was so happy to see 17's video, for example. Although, I mean, it only plays with several elements. It doesn't play with it's not a translation, right? I would say it's more like an intertext or references. I also like I mean, there are so many things I like. Oh, actually, what I really like is also there is by Chae Hun. He wrote a novel, also called Saw Yugi, so Journey to the West. And it's so hidden. All the references are so hidden. It's also part of one of the, I think, the chapter 4 in my book. And I really like this kind of hidden references, and it makes me so happy. So, I mean, I guess we can share this kind of feeling. So you have some kind of code, and then it takes so much effort to decode something. But the moment you realize, oh, this is what he meant, or this is what they meant, then it makes us so happy, right? So becoming this knowing audience. So Chain Hun would be one of the of my favorites, but I have so many favorites. I hope that helped.
Thank you for your answer. So there's another question that just came up. So it's by Graham Reynolds. Thank you so much for the wonderful talk. I'm interested in hearing how you might apply the idea of cloud/story universes to cases of the reception of non-fictional texts. How might this framework work for say works of history like the 시지 or 삼국사기?
Perfect. Yeah. That's also really, really interesting. I think you can apply this idea of the story cloud or story cloud, also this idea of dynamic essence for non-fictional text, as long as there are different versions or definitions. I think it would work for Samgyeopsal, of course, but also for the Shuji. And maybe also, I think sometimes at one point I discussed with some colleagues. So this, for example, when we talk about Korean Confucianism, what is Korean Confucianism? There are different definitions, right? So whenever there is something that we try to define, but there are different definitions, I think this could also help to kind of find a compromise and also say that it's how relative it is. So as long as you have different versions, I think you can apply it. I hope that helped a bit.
Great, thank you. So next question by John Grisofi. Thank you for this presentation. I'm glad I could finally hear more on your work on this topic. I'm curious if you think that among the integral elements, there are not only ones that go with the story, but also ones that correlate with certain receptions of the story for particular audiences or purposes. As a specific example, perhaps, are there certain elements that more commonly make the journey a Buddhist tale or not?
That's also a very good question.
Mm.
And I'm totally agree. So there are some elements that are not necessarily part of the story, but kind of become very popular because of the reception. Before I talk about this Buddha, so for example, I think the author, so Wu Chang'en, as I mentioned, that there is no, that it's difficult to find evidence for an author of the original, because if there is no original, and even for the 1592 novel, it's difficult. But I do think that the author, and it's also one of the integral elements that plays with the idea of the original author. So there are integral elements that do not really contribute to the story, but or that do not really play a role in the story, but contribute to the story by giving it at least the idea of being original or unique. With the journey as a Buddhist tale, yeah. I mean, there are also versions where Korean versions where they are not Buddhist. So there is one version where the pilgrims are not in search for Buddhist scriptures, but for Taoist scriptures. So, and then it's related to Tangun. So I mean, this is kind of wild. So I think, because I mean, it's very difficult to reduce it to anything, right? So there is also a whole discussion, not only about Korean versions, but about the journey to the West. Is it Buddhist, or is it Taoist, or is it Confucian? And I think there are so many different voices. And if you look many versions, I mean, some of the versions really reduce it to something Buddhist or Taoist, but there are many versions that kind of keep this polyphony alive. But of course, I mean, if you look at the integral elements, there is Buddha, there is Guanyin. So there's definitely some of the elements that could put it into one direction. I have to think about it, but it's really, yeah. I hope that helped a bit.
Great question. Yeah, answer too. Well, thank you. So there's actually a question from Celeste, which I didn't get to see because it was in the chat box. Okay, so Celeste is asking, thank you for your talk. I appreciate the move away from the passiveness of reception, or in political science, we discussed diffusion. In your research, did you encounter individuals/institutions that try to assert control or authority over a story cloud to articulate what has to be there to count, or even to enforce copyrights?
Ah, okay. Now I see it here.
Mm.
Ah, as I said, so for example, there are circles, and these circles are the main circles. I mean, people who try to leave the reception studies behind is still a minority. And I think so, especially so when I gave presentations in Korea, not many people were very happy with me. So I said, okay, let's try to understand it like this. But there is still this very much the admiration for something that is old, and also this kind of respect for something that is written in literary Chinese, for example. Um, while I think only because it's literary Chinese, it doesn't mean that it's not popular, right? So, for example, if we again compare 17th video and then the poem from the 14th century, it's both popular culture. I mean, only because it's a poem. I mean, if we say 17th song is popular culture, then the poem is also popular culture. Only because it's written in Chinese doesn't make it less or give it more worth to something, right? So, but I still think, and it might not be it might also be in other circles, but there is still in many circles this kind of admiration for something being written in literary Chinese, or being written in, yeah, being old. And yes, but I think what is extreme are our bureaucratic systems that, so I mean, here you mentioned copyrights, right? I think probably as long as we don't change how library catalogs work, then it's very difficult to find a way out of reception studies.
Yeah, right. We have another, I think, yes, another question in the Q&A box. So thank you. This is from Lyra. Thank you. So nice to hear about this project. I wonder about the role of humor in the tale of its various versions. Are these related to the period, genre, expected readers?
Yeah. Oh yeah, Laura, that's also a very good question. I like all the questions. I think humor plays a role in many versions, not in all. Some of the versions are, perhaps it's sarcasm then more than humor. But I think the many versions are humorous. And this is also what keeps the polyphony, the different voices, the various voices alive. Because there is no authoritarian voice in many of the translations, for example. So it's not really kind of, okay, this is what it means. So there's always kind of, okay, this might be what it means. And then at the end, kind of, there is a joke about something. It's difficult kind of to reduce it to a period or genre. And to kind of celebrate these various voices or the polyphony of the story cloud, I think you also need a certain awareness, right? That this is existing. I think in many versions it's just for fun. So there are versions, of course, that are very deep with hidden references, which are also amazing. But I think the majority, not perhaps half of them, are just really to have fun. And then, of course, their humor plays a role, so because people enjoy it.
Oh, great. Thank you so much. We have one more minute left. So is there any other question from the audience? No, then maybe I could ask the last question as moderator. So I was wondering about this, like, the versions before the original, so 1592. So you mentioned the poem before. Is there any other, I mean, is there a lot of them? Like, how is it that if there were versions of the Journey to the West before the original was published, how did the original one come about? Was it the collection of the various versions that were existing and this, like, the author, the supposedly known author, Osingen sort of just collected them and made it into like a whole, the line story, or, so if you have looked into it, and if you could share your thoughts with us, that would be nice.
Yeah. So there are many versions before 1592, and there is a whole book by, oh, now I forget, what is his name? What is his name? But it's about the antecedents of the Journey to the West. And it's so interesting. There is a whole book by Dudbridge, Glenn Dudbridge, who wrote a whole book on the antecedents of the Journey to the West, which kind of questions the originality of the original, the supposed, right? And because it's quite rich, yeah. And then I think what also Dudbridge says, but what we also have to remember is that I think when we think about that, also the figure on the palaces and so on, this only works if people are familiar with the story. So there is also there. I expect that there are masses of oral versions we of course do not really know about.
Like a folk
But we
legend or things like that.
right.
Mhm.
And this is probably so huge that people just, as we now, for example, when we think about Thor and a hammer, so we already created this today together, this kind of story of Thor and a hammer. So like, a man with a hammer is Thor,
Mhm.
right? So this just works with us today. And in
Mhm.
the same way, if you see like a monkey with a staff, it still works, right? You see, so it's, of course, I think the 1592, it's a collection of circulating stories, but it was not really kind of growing and suddenly there we are. It's
Mhm.
kind of always a patchwork. And also in 1592, there were different editions made at the same time. Some of the
I see.
episodes are lacking in 1592.
Oh.
Uh, it, yeah, so it's not kind of a smooth development. It's more like always like patchwork.
Mhm, mhm. It's interesting to think that, even with that kind of background, the people who are working in the reception studies are thinking, I mean, holding so much high, I guess, um, value to this original work that was published in
Exactly. Yeah.
1592.
And it's not only the journey to the West, but I mean also, for example, with Hung Gil-dong.
Mm,
So this kind of ongoing discussions about Hogyun. Is he really the author? What is
mhm,
the
mhm.
original?
Right.
So
Right.
it's not also not only limited to Korea. It's all over the, so our longing to have like a graspable original and a
Mm,
masterpiece is kind of very strong, I think.
mhm. Yeah, I see that. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I think it's time that we conclude today's event. It's like 3 minutes past 11. Well, I thank you so much, Barbara, for this wonderful talk. I mean, personally, I learned so much, from your talk, and I am very much intrigued in, learning more about this particular topic. And so I'm sure that all the audiences will feel the same way. And thank you, audiences, for staying with us until the end of this event. And hope that if you have any other questions, you will continue to communicate with our speaker today. Yeah, but thank you. And I hope everyone has a good rest of the day. And I'll see you next pre-model lecture series. Bye.
Yes.